Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to a very lovely episode of Between Two Bits. I'm your host, Jason, and with me, hey, wait a minute, who's that I see there? So let's do the counting thing. We have 1, that's me, 2, Richard, 3, Justin, 4, Joseph, and now we have number 5. The Power Rangers are complete, man. We're all complete now.
It's so Janice.
Janice. No, it's not. It's Denise.
It's Denise. Another non-J. Thanks, Denise, because I was the only non-J previous to this. But yeah.
No, it's usually I always get the nephew. I'm Denise Gosline. I live in New York City. Let's see. Interesting fact about myself. I'm a huge sports fan. I'm a Mets season ticket holder. So far, so good this year. So I'm pretty happy about that. Been in the data space now for, I hate to say, over 25 years. I've been working in the data.
You don't look a day over 35.
Thank you. I just turned 21 last week. So I've been in this space for a long time. I actually just love this space, right? I mean, it's the key to everything in the world right now. I just love going out, talking to the customers, trying to help them solve their data problems from the experience that I've absorbed from other accounts and other customers that I've spoken with.
So, data aha moment, data screw up moment.
Oh God, I don't know if it's necessarily a data screw up moment, but definitely an email screw up moment. I think we've all done those. I teach my team, don't do email after a certain hour because I've learned from experience. And let's see, I sent an email, did a reply all instead of a reply, and complaining about a customer in the email, and kind of had a backpedal on that email. So lesson learned from a data application world, don't do email at 2:00 in the morning.
And the thing is that exact moment ties in extremely nicely with what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
So we've all been screwed over the last 2 years. Everyone else who's listening to us has been screwed over the last 2 years, unless you're a sitting UK parliamentarian. I'm just going to leave that to one side. I had to.
That was for free. Yeah.
Come on, it's. So with that in mind, we're going to be talking about working from home. The most exciting job. How can you keep your data secure if you're sitting at a beach in Maui, right?
I wish.
Where I work from.
Yeah, exactly. At what point does margaritas, go well with data, or doesn't go well with data?
Sometimes it makes a lot more sense. A few margaritas. Yeah. The more problems you have, the more they go away with the more margaritas.
Or you end up with a reply all at 2 a.m. It's one or the other.
Yes.
But then the problems all go away because you go away generally when
that's it.
So how do you want to start this, Jason? What's so much to say?
Let's start with a basic question, right? Can every data job be done remotely?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in the world of Snowflake and Azure and Redshift and BigQuery, and it's cloud. I mean, every is a strong word because there are going to be, clean data environments, but I think when we think about the world at large, I mean, I think that what certainly what we see here and what I see elsewhere is a very, very rapid and large transition to, using cloud resources, using remote resources, managed services. So I'll start off by throwing that grenade out there.
Oh yeah, I mean, I completely agree, Justin. It seems insane that we've not been hybrid working or working remotely for a lot longer than we have been recently. It just seems utterly insane because everything that we do, we'll put it this way, I can't think of anything that I do that would be easier to do in the office. In fact, most of the time it's made harder because I've got people there disturbing me. But I think it just seems somewhat insane that we're actually asking this question. It should be, why haven't we done this sooner?
Yeah, I agree. Like, why we haven't done this sooner? How can we be careful? And I think now it's mostly the question of what is the value of the office. What's the real value of actually meeting in person?
We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to those topics.
But in terms of data aspect, I would say for sure I'm with Justin that you can do everything we do remotely. There's always steps to be safe about it. I've seen it from different workplaces that force all their employees to use a VPN. I've seen that quite often lately, of saying if you're not on the VPN, you cannot connect to any of the internal resources. I think that's one step to solve the problem, but I don't think that's actually necessary per se. I think we can talk about data sovereignty if you want, but I don't think the overprotective InfoSec aspect is necessary for remote work. I don't know if you want to dig deeper on which things are okay, which are not okay remotely.
You said InfoSec. So is So when you say remote work, usually we can all, let's say a couple of years ago, right? We weren't really working remotely, even though we're working with remote assets anyway. And you would get your laptop and all your stuff from the IT teams, and it was easier to maintain a bit more control from security because you were physically at a premises. But now, is the whole working from home an issue because it's not that easy to get the resources you need, or nowadays because of the fact that we have a lot of online deliveries, next day kind of deliveries, it's not really an issue, and the issue is purely on security as such?
I think there are some lessons to be learned from resourcing, or of time, of people's time and services. So I do get a bit of an issue from time to time where the IT team or the person in the IT team that I need to speak to isn't actually online, isn't actually awake when I need them. So I think that does lead to having, when you're working on an international company, it does lead to having to have people spread around the world a bit better, I think, with the skills that you need. But then that shouldn't be new, really, because if you work in an office, that should be the case. So I don't. Yeah, maybe that's not an issue. Maybe that's just something that at certain companies it works, and other companies are learning or building up those facilities.
No, I think that's a good point. Well, I think you're spot on, and one of the advantages to opening up your workforce to the world, to remote environments, is that you get more talent, you get more diverse talent. And, a company that was, for instance, just in San Francisco might now have resources that are, really valuable to the company, but that are on a different sleep schedule than the IT team that might need to fix some issue.
Yeah, I mean, but that what you just said there is the overwhelming benefit, I think, of remote working, is that you don't have to move to be near an office or commute in for hours potentially from where you live to actually, get to work. And companies can seek resources, as you said, anywhere in the world, give or take. I think that there is an overwhelming benefit of this. But coming with that is the fact that you have to make sure that you've got, I guess, your IT team. Let's go back to IT. We always like picking on IT, but you need to make sure you've got certain people providing services also available in those time zones.
So are we going to make a distinction between having people in different places in the world, but they could be in the offices within the networks of the company? Or are we also talking about people who are at home and people who are on premises?
I think primarily the issue tends to be on how do you manage those people at home?
Yeah.
Is it a leap of faith for most companies? Is it a thing of trust? I mean, you employ the person in the first place, right? So There should be some element of trust right there, right?
I think before we, the original question, is this an InfoSec challenge?
Mhm.
I think it's an HR challenge because there are a lot of problems with working from home, with having an entirely remote workforce. There's Zoom fatigue. There's all kinds of different cultural leakage that happens, burnout. We all tend to, I don't know about y'all, but I tend to not really respect time boundaries. You get busy on something and you just keep working on it. And I know, I'm in the States. Denise and I are in the United States. I know it's probably worse for you guys because you work with a lot of counterparts here in the United States. And it's easy, to stay on when you can find people. And I don't have to, at 7 o'clock at night, I don't have to worry if Jason's still online, but that might be the only time Jason can catch me. So, I think those kinds of things become the real challenges of working from home. I don't think, from a technology standpoint, I think it is harder to have water cooler conversations. Those really spontaneous conversations are difficult. You have things like Slack huddles and, they're trying to solve those problems, but, maybe task management, who's responsible for what. Some of these things can be addressed with technologies, but I think, the challenge is going to be for us to continue to be happy and continue to be content and, joyful at work as we become less physically connected with the people that we work with.
Yeah, Justin, I agree, right? I mean, some of us have been working remote for years, right? I've always been working remote since the mid 2000s, right? So I think there are new concerns with InfoSec and security, right? With more people at home and having worries about people, let's say, working at a Starbucks for a day, right? Getting on networks and stuff. But I agree, it's that aspect of time management, more that HR, the Zoom fatigue, and the more they give you to access and tools to kind of replicate that you're still working in an office, just add more to that fatigue, right? So I do look and agree. I think it is much more of an HR concern than necessarily a security concern as customers. As employees are staying home more frequently.
I think it's interesting that people are talking about burnout here and the trouble that comes with that. I very much like you, Denise, I've been working from home or sometimes on site, but often working from home for a very long time. And I work now to a task basis rather than the amount of hours. So I have certain tasks that I want to get done on a particular day. Now, if one of those tasks, or if all of my tasks take me half a day, then I might add a couple. But let's say it takes me 2 hours shorter than the day that I'm supposed to be working. Then I'm like, well, I've done the work that I needed to get done. I'm done. But if those tasks take me longer, then yes, I will spend longer doing it. I just focus on the tasks that I need to get done. But also, because I have teams, I've got a team in China, I work a lot with people in the US. It means that I get up stupidly early some mornings to speak to the guys in China, and then I have to stay late with the guys in America. So I break my day up. So now, whereas I used to, for example, I play a lot of tennis. I used to play tennis in the evenings. I can't really do that now because if anyone in the US wants to speak to me, it will be right in that time. So I'll take a couple of hours off at lunchtime, play tennis then 4 days a week or something like that. And I make up the hours or I make up the tasks that I've got to get done in the time surrounding that. So I break my day up. I don't think you can do that when you're office based. And it also means that, if you are working with people around the world and you're office based, you're limited from saving your personal time. Working from home, you can keep it.
I can give you a bit of the French experience has been quite interesting because I think France doesn't have that much of a developed work from home culture. This was purely a COVID thing. Since the pandemic, people have been introduced to remote work, whereas before they didn't really have it. And I think the biggest difference for people here has been the change in not seeing people, like physical interactions with people on a daily basis. I can give you an example of employees when they go into the French office, they kiss people on the cheeks, they go through the entire open space and they say hi to everyone. And I think that was the hardest for people to move past. And we can see now that things opened up. A large percentage of the workforce, larger than the UK and the US, have went back to offices. And I think it's not driven mostly by any security concerns or data concerns, but purely just a cultural thing in France of people wanting to be next to other people during the workday. I think that's also a big point.
So what you're saying there is people in France want to go into the office because they like kissing each other.
That's pretty much it.
Okay.
I expect to kiss
summary.
on both cheeks next time I see you, Joseph.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing is that one thing that we see as well is the systems, right? The systems we use to communicate, the systems that we use to transfer data between ourselves and everything.
Right.
What issues do we generally tend to find? Because the thing is that we tend to use stuff like Zoom. And you were saying Zoom fatigue, right? Which means we're using a Zoom way too much than we should be using Zoom anyway. You know, it's like doing a Lord of the Rings marathon every single day, right? You know, it's good for the first 2 or 3 times, but after a while, it'll be like, oh, you know, you get to the whole Frodo, you know, and you're late. It's like, yeah, I don't want to be late anymore. You know, it's you know, you can pretty much talk every single line from the film, but is using stuff like Zoom where you're communicating figures, you're communicating personal data, and you know, confidential data, is it compliant?
I get nervous still to this day. You know, I mean, how much does Zoom keep track of, right? Are they recording our sessions, right? You know, how much does our company watch what we do, like using things like Slack and watching, and do they get the recordings of the sessions that we're doing, right? You know, I mean, not that I'm doing anything that I have to be ashamed of or afraid of or I'm doing wrong, but there's so much that's just tracking every movement we do today, right? You know, when I started working from home, the first thing I started to do was turn off all my electronics, right? Because it's tracking, or as I'd be in the middle of a call and Alexa started to talk to me for absolutely no reason. But there is that concern still, and we're in the data company business, you know, we're in the business of data, but there's just so much data around what is being tracked, what is being captured and reported against as we're working from home, right? I mean, there's a lot out there that, you know, that we should be aware of.
That's a really good point, actually. I don't know how much I can go into on this, but I had to raise a concern with the security team because there was something in the security document that said that software would be allowed to be put on any of our devices used to do work. And that's kind of implied that potentially personal devices that we were working with, like my phone, for example. My phone, I get my emails from my phone, and I was a little bit concerned as to what I would be monitored looking at or reading or whatever. It turned out that I didn't have anything to worry about, although the terminology, the wording used suggested that, you know, I had to be a bit careful. But it does lead you to think that, I think this goes back to what Justin was saying about the water cooler moments. When you're in an office, you can have a quick conversation around the water cooler. It doesn't get recorded. It's a moment in time. It's said, it's done, it's gone, it's not recorded. You don't have that when you're working remotely. You can't have those sort of informal chats, those sort of, you know, you can't sort of let your hair down and sort of, you know, blurt out something that maybe shouldn't be heard by everybody, but you just got to get it off your chest. You can't do that when you're working remotely unless you've got another channel. And I think that that's something that businesses will have to look into, because I think it's very important that employees get to have that non-monitored communication, and Slack, Zoom, all of these products that we use potentially could be monitored by somebody else. Not saying that they are, but they could be.
I don't know if you guys have been on a call and, you know, with a group of people, and the call's serious and things are hot and heavy, and as soon as the Zoom ends, someone calls me on my cell phone. I see my cell phone light up, and it's somebody who is on the call, and I'm going, uh-oh. Because that's the channel for, let's talk about this privately.
It generally tends to happen. You do get let's face it, I think everyone in the company will always have that ranting buddy. Who would be the one?
I was just going to say,
oh God, did you hear? The thing is
and
that
it's on WhatsApp.
Always.
And it's on WhatsApp or something completely not operated by the company.
The thing is that when it comes to stuff like privacy, every time that we rant, we're getting recorded. Zoom actively records all the time, and they record all the data as well. So many companies actually feel that software like Zoom is non-compliant.
No,
I mean, I follow a widely known privacy professional who very, very regularly says, look, Zoom, Google Analytics, all these kind of solutions aren't actually privacy compliant.
Mm-hmm. I was on a call with a governmental body a month ago, and they asked us to connect on Teams. And the moment we clicked the record button, I think the person from our side said, "Oh, can we record the meeting?" And usually you ask that question while pressing the record button. And the moment we pressed the record button, everyone in the call vanished, disappeared. And they came back 5 minutes later saying, "Sorry, we cannot be on a call that is recorded. That's against our policy." And at first I was like, that's a weird thing to do. And then it made more sense because you are representing a governmental agency, and everything you're recorded saying doesn't just represent you, but in this case, it represents a whole nation, but it also represents your company in a more specific way. So it's a pretty big deal.
So when we talk about data and recording, do we make the distinction between written forms of data or recorded forms of data and verbal sort of audio forms?
But that's the thing. Once you're over Zoom, everything is a video or an audio. It's enough proof. It's, as I said, it hasn't happened on a cooler. No one's recorded you secretly. You willingly went on in front of a camera and recorded yourself, pretty much. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a big evidence.
It's on the record or off the record,
So in terms of data and security, we're gonna cut it off right now. But since it's 5 of us, 5 key takeaways from keeping data secure whilst working from home.
I can say that there's an acceptable amount of things that will be either leaked, recorded, that we have to accept. There's a big risk. Just by working remotely, you accept an amount of risk. There are certain steps that you can do to avoid it. Encrypt people's computers, even if they're at home, they get stolen, someone cannot access the data, basic stuff like that. But also best practices of locking your precious data and your precious content behind your network, so that if employees want to access them, they have to connect to a sort of a internal VPN or network. I think that's also important. And the last step would be to not, I don't know how to say this nicely, don't
keep your
choke people. Yeah, don't choke people. Otherwise, they would go through different channels, and we all do it. As you said, you have a ranting buddy, and you go through a personal channel on the side. So if people feel like they're watched, they will find ways to get out.
Leading to more security risk. Yeah.
Well, what you just said there, Joseph, though, it's interesting because with people working from home and a company not wanting to share their data, for example, it's so easy for me to share data if I wanted to. I don't need to copy it onto a USB disk. I could take a picture of my screen. There's all sorts of bits and pieces that I could do which wouldn't be monitored. So I think you then have to go and take the security back a little bit, or to sort of not back, but you have to know each and every person has accessed a particular file, a particular piece of data. And then it's a case of, if person A, B, and C access that data and that data got out, we know that it can only be person A, B, or C that did it.
Yeah.
I think that's the mechanism that has to be used, which then makes people feel like they're being watched. So this is a big problem, I think, that does need to be resolved, because how do you protect this information while allowing people to feel comfortable and not feel like they're being spied on?
For me, it's a big ethical thing, right? You're right. I could still get access to data anyway. I don't have to physically download a file and save it somewhere, right? I agree. I could take a picture of something and share it with someone right from my phone, which is not monitored. But to me, it's even more where we really need to handle good business ethics, right? As we're working more remotely and have access and more people looking over our shoulders at anything that we do, right? I mean, like I said, many people are sitting in a Starbucks working just to get out of their house for an hour, while their kids are home, right? So there's a lot of that really has to be enforced around the security of data also. It's just not the technologies and the processes to protect the data, but it's also the person that really has to follow a good mindset to make sure that data stays secured in any way it can.
Yeah, and I will just say that I think regardless of whether people are working full-time in the office or full-time at home, in the modern work world, every company, no matter what the situation is, you have to deal with these same challenges, because the same person could just slip out of the office and go to Starbucks for a little bit. And I think that's the reality of the world that we live in, is that it's all in the cloud. You got to figure out how to secure your cloud data and how to maintain secure connectivity. And you got to do that whether the people are in an office, whether they're at their house, unless it's some, clean data environment, specific data sovereignty situation. I think it's, all of these rules and all of this stuff applies across the board now.
For me, I'll finish off just by saying, regardless if you haven't pressed the record button, just assume that you're always being recorded, and just be careful how much you're sharing out. There are ways of sharing data securely. It shouldn't be done through Zoom or any other kind of video recording software. Even if you're working from abroad, or working remotely, there are ways to get things done. Just be careful and exercise some caution.
Such a grim ending.
Company issued laptops. They can do whatever they want with these laptops. Yeah. They're owned by the company.
Yeah. So thanks, everyone. The next thing we'll do is we'll be moving on to our next job of the week with our very own Richard Hall.
Yes, the job of the week. So this week, I realised actually that for several of the episodes, I've been talking about overlooking and just bypassing OAuth 2 authentication because it was a bit complicated. And I thought, well, do you know what? We ought to look at that. So that's what we're going to be looking at this week. And next week, we say week, Jason. We're not doing this on a weekly basis, are we? It's sort of every 2 weeks.
No, this is on a bi-weekly basis.
It should be a bi-weekly basis. But anyway, following on from this episode's job of the week, I'm going to be doing something using that authentication. So yeah, see what you think.
On reviewing what I've covered with this section, I realised that a couple of times I have skipped over OAuth 2 authentication. I chose to use simpler methods of getting access to use for API demonstrations. These simpler methods are not always practical for real-world examples. So for this job of the week, I will be demonstrating how to work with OAuth 2 using a Talend job. To demonstrate this, I shall be using Fitbit's implementation of OAuth 2. In the next episode, I will then show how this job can be used while working with Fitbit REST APIs. Before I show the job, let's start with registering a Fitbit app. This is the first step when working with OAuth 2. After sorting out your registration for Fitbit, go to https://dev.fitbit.com/apps. Here you can see my registered apps and the one I'll be using for this. To register a new one, click on the Register an App tab. Here we can see the application name, description, application website URL. I'm just using http://localhost, organization, organization website URL, terms of service URL, privacy policy URL, OAuth 2 application type set to personal, redirect URL, Default access type, I just want read-only. The redirect URL is the only important URL that needs setting in this example. I set it to http://localhost. Click to say that you have read the terms of service, after having read them of course, and then you would click register. But since I already have one set up, I'll skip to showing that one. I've called mine Data Collector. I'll click here to edit the settings so that you can see what I've used. You can see my application name, description. The URL settings have all been set to http://localhost. As I said, the important URL to be set for this is the redirect URL. If we come out of edit mode, we can see the values we can work with. The client ID, the client secret. Here is the redirect URL, the OAuth 2 authorization URI for use when generating an authorization URL, the OAuth 2 access refresh token request URI used to request access and refresh tokens. One of the good things about Fitbit's implementation of OAuth 2 is that they make it as easy as possible for you to test out. Take a look and have a play with the OAuth 2 tutorial page, seen here. This page allows you to add your application's relevant data here and will generate you the required URLs that you will need. Note, I should have clicked the authorization code flow at the top, as that is what we are using. You can use this page to get an idea of what is happening. Here is the first URL that the job will generate. This will be used to manually authenticate your app with Fitbit. The rest of this page will take you through the steps after that. Make sure to select authorization code flow instead of leaving it as implicit grant flow. Fitbit also help by providing some good documentation on this process. If you go to dev.fitbit.com/build/reference/web-api/developer-guide/authorization/, it'll take you through the steps required and the steps that I will show in the job in a couple of minutes. A very useful document. One final little piece to show you is the Fitbit web API page for you to explore the functions of the API. You can see this at dev.fitbit.com/build/reference/web-api/explore/. Remember the trailing / at the end. We can test out the functions before we go through the process of configuring OAuth 2 authentication in our app here. Let's look at a simple example of how to browse the activity types. To do this, we click on Try It Out, and then click the Execute button. And it failed. Why? Because even though you do not need to officially set up an app to use this, you still need to authorize. Thankfully, there is an Authorize button where you can do this in seconds, like this. Now if we hit execute again, you'll see the API work this time and shows us a JSON representation of all of the activity types. Now that we have seen all of this, remember to make use of this stuff when trying this out, we can now look at the job that I've created. As with the rest, this was built using Talend Open Studio ESB version 8. So to try this out, you will need this version or later. As you can see, this is somewhat of a bigger job than I've shown before. Now you have seen the complete job, I'll resize my workspace to make it easier to show what is happening. The first part of this job is the Read Context Variables section. This does what it says on the tin. I'm keeping the data in a text file, so the first component is a T file input delimited. This is configured to read the data. This is a semicolon separated file with two columns, key and value. The schema represents this. Here we can see an example of the file I'm using. I've called this fitbitcontext.csv. It has the following keys with some of the values present. Client secret with its value, redirect URI with its value, refresh token with a value yet to be set during the job, scope with its scope values, text file, the path to this file, client ID with its value set, access token with its value yet to be set by the job. Remember that the client secret and client ID were created when we set up the app with Fitbit. The T-file input delimited sends its data to the T-context load component. This is a useful component for loading context variables. The key column holds the context variable name and the value column holds its value. Here we can see the context variables created for this job. Let me just expand the box a little. Here we can see the path to the file holding the context variable keys and values. You will recall that this was also set in the file. The reason for this is that we are completely overwriting the file in this job. So all values that are used must be enabled to be reset. You will see all of the context variables here that you will see in the file. The next component is a tjava component. As it is labelled, this is used to set the authorization header for the REST service calls. This is done with this code. You can see how the client ID and client secret are encoded to base 64. This follows a string of basic followed by a space. This is set to the global map. The first time we run this, or when there is no access or refresh token, the following runIf trigger will fire. The logic for this is, if the access token is null or an empty string, and the refresh token is null or an empty string, this path will fire. This takes us down the path of authorizing our access manually for the first time. The first tjava after this runIf is where a URL is constructed that we will paste into a browser. In the code here, we link the base URL and the response type to the client ID, the redirect URI, the scope, and set an expiration period. This is printed to the output window when the job runs so that we can copy it and use it. We then have a T-message component. This is unusual in a Talend job since we normally wouldn't have user interaction in the middle of a job. In this case, and only for the first time running this, we need to be able to supply the job a value during the run. I have left a lot of this component configured as standard, but I have changed the buttons option to be of type question so that we can paste a value back to the job. Once the T-message box is fired and a value is returned, the following tjava will process the value and extract a code that is returned by the web authentication process that the user will have been through. This uses simple Java string manipulation. The value extracted is stored in the global map. Once this code is extracted, we go to the Get Tokens from Return Code subjob and start with the TREST client component. The URL for the TREST client is https://api.fitbit.com/OAuth2/token. It is set to the post method and to accept type JSON. The query parameters are set using context variables, computed values, the code just extracted, and a hard-coded value of authorization code, as this will be constant. If we look at the advanced settings, you can see that the convert response to DOM document has been unticked as we want JSON returned. You can also see the content type and authorization headers are set. The authorization header is set to the value computed in the very first tjava. If there is an error with the TREST client, it is a good idea to have that printed out to the console when developing. So I have set a tlog row on the error output. We then have the tExtractJSON fields component. This will be very simple JSON. You can see it by turning on the tlog row just before this component. The loop JSON path query is just set to a $ character and the access token and refresh token are set below. You can see that the output schema is set to those columns. The final component of this subjob is a tjava row. Here I'm setting the context variables, access token and refresh token, to the values extracted from the JSON. I'm using context.setProperty to do this. The next part of this path in the job is the update context file subjob. For this we use a tContextDump component, which outputs the keys and values of our context variables to rows. Finally, I'm using a tFile output delimited component to update the file that we started with updated values. At the end of the job, after whichever path that is followed is complete, is the return context subjob. This uses a tContext dump and sends the values to a tBuffer output. This is set to have two columns, key and value, which we can see in the schema here. This component allows you to send those columns outside of the job to a parent job, which is how this job will be used in the next episode. So this path is the path taken on the first run when no refresh token exists. But when a refresh token exists, the whole process of generating an access token can be carried out with no human intervention. I'll show this path here. If we go back to the first tjava, we see another runIf trigger. Let's look at the logic for this. This trigger will fire if the refresh token context variable is not null and if it is also not an empty string. If this logic is met, the getNewAccess token from refresh token subjob is triggered. The first component is a TREST client. It is configured in a similar way to the TREST client we looked at a few minutes ago, with a couple of differences. The URL is the same. This is https://api.fitbit.com/OAuth2/token. The query parameters that are set are expires in to a hard-coded period of time, grant type to refresh token, which is hard-coded, and refresh token, which is provided by the refresh token context variable. The advanced settings are configured in the exact same way as the TREST client shown earlier, as can be seen here. The next component, a tExtractJSON fields, is configured in exactly the same way as the tExtractJSON fields component used in the first path I showed, shown here. As with the previous path, the next component is a tjava row. Again, this is essentially doing the same thing. It is setting the access token and refresh token context variables. Following the tjava row, we have a runIf link. The logic to trigger this is based on seeing that more than 0 rows are processed by the tjava row. If this is triggered, the path will write the updated refresh token and access token data to the context file, exactly the same way as before. The job will then output the results to the parent job using the tContext dump and tBuffer output as shown before. If the TREST client fails, we have a tlog row to output that failure to the output window. We then have another runIf trigger to check to see that more than 0 rows have passed through the tlog row. If this condition is met, we have a tjava which is used to wipe any values from the refresh token and access token context variables and to print the message to the output window. The job then triggers the tContext dump mentioned before to update the context file, this time setting the values of the access token and refresh token to an empty string. This will cause the requirement for you to reauthorize your Fitbit application, so you will go through path 1 again. Let's look at the potential paths this job can take. First, the context file is read. If it contains a refresh token, the job will look to generate a new access token. If it does not contain a refresh token or access token, the job will treat this as a brand new authorization and will aim to generate both an access token and a refresh token. Let's run this job to show both paths and how they function. First of all, we'll look at the Fitbit context.csv file to see its initial state after the Fitbit app registration details are populated. We can see the client secret is set, the redirect URI is set, the refresh token is empty, the scope is set, the context file is set, the client ID is set, and the access token is empty. Now we've seen this, let's start the job. The first thing we see is a URL which we need to copy and paste into a browser and hit enter. When the page loads, we need to accept all of the scopes and click allow. This This will result in being redirected to localhost with our generated code in the URL. We copy this, then paste the complete URL returned into the message pop-up. Then click OK. We can see that the job has taken the path to generate an access token and a refresh token. We can see the entire path taken by following the red rows counted at each stage in green. If we take another look at the Fitbit context.csv file, we can see that the values present at the beginning remain, but the access token and refresh token values are now present. Now, if we run it again with these values present in the file, the job will take a different path and update the refresh token and access token without requiring user intervention. Again, we can follow the path taken by looking at the rows processed in green. We can see that the path taken is the other path. If we take another look at the Fitbit context.csv file, we can see that the refresh token and access token has changed. As I said earlier, this job will be made available for you to download along with an example Fitbit context.csv file. You'll need to add your settings from the Fitbit app registration page onto this file. In the next episode, I will take you through a job to use this job while accessing Fitbit data. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know.
So thanks everyone for today. Quite a good discussion, I think, honestly, considering that we're all based absolutely at home, absolutely anywhere, everywhere. Right? So.